Thank you. So we're having our afternoon section that the CCG and EPC we collaborated on the EU-China think tank exchanges special program. So basically, this is a EU-China exchange program, and we are very pleased to work with EPC for the last 4 or 5 years already, and we've done this twice already in China. So we've also been to Brussels a few times, and very pleased to have Fabian, the CEO of EPC, and of course Ambassador Declan, of the chairman of EPC. So, and all the distinguished panelists, the guests, and also we have the Ferdinando of the Italian ambassador joining us as well. So I'm not going to count the names, but I'm sure you has been all seen on the list. And we have also the Chinese and other European delegates. Of course, quite a few of my colleagues, senior fellows of EPC, and we have some industry representative here too. So I think it's important that we continue this EU-China think tank dialogue. And particularly, EU is very active in terms of international relations, on the multilateralism, on supporting WTO, on supporting the global traditionally have always played so many important role, and as the third largest, second or third largest economy of the EU combined. It's so important, and we are facing an election of EU this year, and we are also hoping that there's a China-EU relations that, and China-US relations that we have to work to stabilize and even improve. So it's really important that we're having this afternoon section to discuss all those issues. And so what I would like to say is that China attaches great importance to the bilateral relation with the EU, and we know that President Xi has actually recently visited Europe and brought back many agreement and successful results of a discussion, and so we have seen many European leaders visiting China. Olaf Scholz was here a few months ago, and of course President Xi was in France, and so it's important that we are, China and EU has a long tradition. We have no bordering issues, we have no Hidden trap issues, and we just want to maintain a good cooperation. But of course, there's differences. There's concerns on the economic front, on the different ideological differences, and but I think there's always a way to work together. For example, China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, EU proposed the EU Global Gateway, and we could work together, even with B3W. So, and also in the future we could do something on AI. For example, China and France released a joint declaration on AI and global governance during President Xi's state visit to France recently. So this agreement, underscore our commitment to address AI risk and promote secure, reliable, and trustworthy AI technology. So I think that basically we are here to discuss, and I'm very happy to make this brief opening remark. And as I mentioned, the CCG and EPC has been collaborating for so long, and we are very pleased to hear different voices. We provide a platform for participation, and we'd like to strengthen the China-EU cooperation. So I stop there. Thank you. So,
thank you very much. Firstly, a very warm welcome from me as co-host as well. I'm very happy that we have this chance to continue our EU-China think tank exchanges. And in that context, I also wanted to thank the European Union for financing this project. And certainly a big thanks also to CCG, Henry, Mabel, and everyone else who have been great partners, and we are hoping and are confident that we will continue that partnership also in future. Let me also use this opportunity to thank the EPC team, which has worked very hard, and also thank you to all the guests who have traveled to join in this discussion. I think in a time like this, it is extremely important to have dialogue, to have an open and honest dialogue with each other, not despite the geopolitical situation, but because of the geopolitical situation. At that moment in time, it is even more important to continue to talk and to continue to find solutions for some of the common global challenges which we are facing. We have to recognize that there are also challenges within that relationship, and I'm sure we will have a very good discussion of all of those aspects. But given that I also will get a chance to speak in the first panel, I will not go too much into content, but thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Henry. Thanks, Fabian. So I think we'll now start the round table. Just in terms of procedures and working methods, what I propose is that we alternate between a Chinese speaker and a European speaker to ensure variety and rhythm. Also, I would invite, towards the end of the discussion, Henry and Fabian to come in again with comments, and of course they should feel free at any time. So as we've started, we've gone Henry, Fabian, so I think we go back to a Chinese speaker now. So could I invite Yang Chen, Executive Director, Institute of European Studies at SICIR, to take the floor, please. Thank you. So,
it doesn't seem to be there.
Chen Yang 在哪儿? Okay. Then in that case, could I then slightly deviate from the procedure I just said and invite my distinguished friend and colleague, Ambassador Ferdinando Nelli Feroci, to take the floor, please. Thank you, Ferdinando.
Thank you, Declan, and many thanks to CICG and to EPC for organizing jointly this session, which I think is very useful. I hope we're going to be very useful and timely. Let me remember, I'm sure that all of you are aware that back in 2019, the European Union described China with the most famous triptych, being at the same time as an important partner for dealing with major global issues, an economic competitor, and also as a systemic rival. A partner because China was already then recognized as an absolutely important partner in dealing with global challenges, like, for instance, the climate change, the energy transition, the protection of environment, food security, or global health. An economic competitor as a recognition that the strength of the Chinese economy and their incredible development in technology had become a challenge for Europe, and also because to a certain extent we in Europe consider that China is not 100% compliant with the commitments that China undertook when becoming a member of WTO. And finally, systemic rival, because unfortunately we have to recognize, this is a very open and frank session, I think we have to speak openly. We differ on very important things when it comes to certain values and principles, on certain issues that are related to domestic Chinese governance, but also on certain aspects of China's posture on international affairs. I don't want to deal with this in in detail, but these are things that are very well known by all of you. Now, my point of departure is that that description, which was adopted more or less formally by the European Union back in 2019, is still valid in its essence. But unfortunately, the situation has become even more complex and complicated than it used to be 5 years ago, for a number of reasons. The first one is COVID. COVID, and in particular, the economic impact of COVID on our economies, including in particular European economies, has made us aware of the consequences of economic fragmentation, of the weaknesses of global value chains, and the risk related to excessive dependencies and economic vulnerabilities. The second, and in particular, made us aware of the risk of an excessive dependence on China, and I will say a word of this in a moment. The second element which has made our relations more complicated than they used to be in 2019 is the war in Ukraine. And I have to be, once more, to be very frank and honest, we were rather disappointed by the role played by China so far in that respect. We would have expected a much clearer stand in condemning Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We would have expected more solidarity in our effort to isolate Russia and a more proactive role in the search of a peaceful and political solution. We are all aware that China presented a peace plan, which was very interesting, but again, to be frank and honest, we had the impression that it was not ready to fully implement and to exert the necessary pressure on the Russian side in order to make their plan operational. And one more element which has complicated the situation when it comes to relations between the European Union and China is once more the result of both COVID and the war in Ukraine, and the need for the European Union to adopt and implement a strategy which is meant to increase and improve our economic competitiveness and to improve our economic security. So for these three factors, in part also for our own choices, I have to realize, and I have to, maybe you will not share these views, that the situation has become more complicated than it used to be in 2019. I will not discuss in my presentation now, because that will bring me too far, differences of views when it comes to international relations or fundamental values and principles. Is that they are very well known. Unfortunately, to a certain extent, they remain. That can be manageable with some degree of goodwill, which I think is necessary on both sides. And I will mainly concentrate on the differences in the economic field. And to explain why and to what extent these differences are there, I would focus and concentrate on the choice we made in Europe to make the improvement of our competitiveness as a strategic goal of the European Union today and for the foreseeable future. And this is again one of the consequences of COVID and the war in Ukraine, as I said, because we realized that our economy was excessively dependent on the external for many, many important supplies. We realized that we needed to become more autonomous. This brings us to the notion of strategic autonomy, which is another important element of our strategy. And this brought us to adopt a number of measures that were meant to reduce our dependencies and also to improve and increase our economic security. To be very honest and frank, we never thought in Europe that decoupling would have been a feasible strategy when it comes to China. We decided to decouple with Russia for very evident reasons. Whether we succeeded or not, it's another story. But the decision was there and was a response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. With China is a totally different story. We do not consider decoupling as a feasible strategy. We consider that we have to work on something which is much more, in a sense, reasonable, not easy to implement, which is called de-risking. Now, de-risking is a key word that describes many different things. And it has to be noted also that this is part of our strategy to realize strategic autonomy. De-risking can be implemented through a series of different measures. Some of them are defensive in their nature, thinking in particular at measures that we have taken to scrutinize foreign investment or also outbound investment. Think at measures that we are using or threaten to use against unfair trade practices by third countries, measures that we are at our disposal as anti-coercion measures adopted by third countries, and so on and so forth. Other measures are defined, I don't know whether this is a correct definition, but are defined as more offensive in the sense that they are meant to increase our own autonomy, to improve our competitiveness. Look at the measures that we are trying to adopt. We have adopted and tried to implement to become more autonomous on raw materials, on chips and semiconductors and other things. But, and then I would like to stress one point, which in my view is absolutely important. This strategy is not meant to be interpreted as anti-Chinese. It is a strategy that has a general value, a global application. If it has a direct impact on EU-China relations, it's only for one reason, because China economy is too important, is too big, and the two economies of China and Europe are so interdependent that unavoidably China becomes a target of this measure, or risks becoming a target of these measures. So there is nothing particularly aggressive on our side against China. We in Europe want to continue to have dialogue with China. We want to continue to have a collaborative attitude with this country, which you consider as an essential partner in international affairs. And I think, if I may conclude, some few recommendations that are very evident, but I think they need to be repeated on all possible occasions. We have to continue and intensify dialogue among Europeans and Chinese, possibly dialogue conducted by common institutions. We Europeans have to avoid to rush to China to diversify our positions in order to present ourselves as best friends of China. We have to avoid any risks of escalating tensions, which is true for both sides. I think to a certain extent we also have to avoid interference in domestic affairs, because the interferences of this sort would bring us nowhere. And we have to avoid, this is very important, a spiral of protectionist measures that are there and there are risks for it from both sides. Finally, if I may, two final recommendations which are aimed both at the EU side and at the Chinese side. For the EU, and speak very freely because I know this is an open discussion, I'm not an official so I can speak. The first recommendation would be to avoid the free riding risks of countries that sometimes try to present themselves on their own side with China and try to stick as much as possible to a common position, because that would make it easier for us to defend our common positions with Chinese interlocutors. And for China to avoid the temptation of playing the Europeans against each other, because that wouldn't bring us too far away and too distant. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ferdinando. And I would just say generally, and Ferdinando very much was in line with that, we'd aim for each speaker to speak for about 6 minutes maximum, so there'll be time for some discussion at the end. Next, it's my pleasure to invite my old friend, Ma Ker, who's former Deputy Director General of MOFCOM, the Department of European Affairs, former Minister Councillor of the Chinese Embassy in France, and non-resident Senior Fellow in CCG, to take the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I speak Chinese. My English is not sufficient.
I'm very happy to attend this afternoon's panel organized by CCG with the title of EU-China Think Tank Exchanges. And the friends and experts from European Union. And so we have this meeting face-to-face to discuss on the relation between China and EU and affairs related with each other. I used to be the Deputy Director General of MOFCOM, Department of European Affairs. And since I took the office, And right now, I'm retired, but during my service time in the Department of Foreign European Affairs, I was working in Europe, and 8 years in France, in the embassy, as an ambassador. So I personally have witnessed, during my work career, I have witnessed the development experience between China and the European Union, from a very small and a little all the way to something big between each other. So when I was in my department in European affairs, and the so-called European community back then, the relation between that community with China was very superficial in the beginning. It was in last century, and the bilateral trade volume is only 3.2 billion, but last year the volume is about 700-something billion euros. So China and EU relations, by all means, has been fundamentally changed positively in terms of economics, politics, the society, and especially in terms of the investment and trade. We can see the tremendous changes. And I personally have witnessed the enormous and positive and very encouraging development of the relations between China and Europe. And I personally have spent a big part of my time in the European countries, and I have been visiting a lot of events in Europe for 40+ times for a lot of communications. So China-EU relations, especially the trade relations between each other, has been enhanced. And I myself was very, very proud of what we have contributed to. But in recent years, I have seen that this relations has fallen into a certain valley. It was really something that I feel sorry for. For example, we have taken a lot of years investing very heavily on a certain platform for investment between China and EU, but finally stopped, and the exchanges communications mechanisms have been maintained for a long time, but ceased to conduct any events. And so all of this cohort of the issues in front of us, especially the investment and the trade issues, have become more and more prominent. EU and China, the positionings, there are 3 positionings: trading partners and the competitive rivals and the systematic foes, and so on and so forth. But I think this kind of positionings are sort of different from before. And China-EU relations, to us as a think tank fellows, we have to reflect why on earth we have come to this far. But I don't think that is one responsibility by just one single party. Both sides has the responsibility of their own. And we have to reflect, and we have to do the self-reflection respectively. And there are several reasons why we've gone so far. The first reason is the international environment has been changed, and that influenced both sides' relations. And especially the COVID pandemic of the 3 years hampered the exchanges of personnel between each other, or even stopped the exchanges of the personnel. So without a face-to-face meeting and a communication or dialogue like us, what we are doing right now, the understanding would be somehow hampered and damaged. Although we have the internet, although we have the Zooms or the virtual meeting formats, it's very convenient to have a Zoom meeting online, but that cannot replace the face-to-face meeting. So no face-to-face meeting exchanges of officials between the governments, and no people-to-people communications, and no journalist-to-journalist communications. Misunderstanding will be posed and exacerbated and even hyped. Like I have mentioned before, the previous speaker had mentioned, the Ukraine crisis and the exacerbated situation of the economics, which also further worsen the relations between both sides to some degree. And the third reason is the think tanks studies by the think tanks between each other is insufficient. So the people-to-people communication and organization-to-organization communication are in the insufficient status, like the study between China and Japan and China and South Korea, and the organizations on the study on all of these relations are actually not much enough. And the studies by the foreign experts on China is insufficient as well, and vice versa. Or the studies are not in-depth enough, and which will lead to the very superficial result of the research, and which will also turn into the very superficial and misled conclusions about both sides. So I think the mutual learning and exchanges of the studies by each one of the experts and think tanks are very important, but not efficient and not effective at all in the past. This is something that we have to handle. China-EU relations to China aspect, or how do Chinese people look at European country and the European people? We feel very positive about European countries and people in Europe.
Because there's no geopolitical tensions, and the Chinese people love European culture, and we really enjoy traveling to Europe. European countries rank among the first in terms of tourist destinations of the Chinese. So Chinese people have good relationship with Europe. But how can we move forward or improve the relationship between China and Europe to put it on the track of rapid growth of friendship? And we need to work hard on various fronts. As think tanks, we need to make some objective, feasible recommendations. The essence of China-EU relationship, the nature of the relationship, the potential of the relationship should be fully reflected in order to push forward the improvement of the relationship. So there's a lot we can do. So I think the forum hosted by CCG is a very good opportunity because we can meet with our old friends. The former ambassador from Ireland, I've met with him a number of times when I was working with MOFCOM, and I visited Ireland a number of times. And the Irish people are very friendly, and they left us with very favorable impressions. I'll stop for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Director General Ma, and thank you for those kind words too. But you emphasized some very important points: the need for people-to-people relations, the need for study to be accurate, and you raised the question of how to move forward and how best to ensure and actualize the potential of the EU-China relationship. So I think, like the previous speaker, Ambassador Nelli Feroci, there's some very rich basis of which we go forward. And in that vein, can I invite Elvire Fabry, Senior Research Fellow of the Jacques Delors Institute, to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you, CCG and EPC, for this, for organizing this discussion and for inviting me. We mentioned the visit of President Xi in Europe recently. It was a very expected visit, and it was very welcome, because I think we can all agree that the EU and China have endorsed much more defensive posture recently, and that we have been moving from a phase of multiple announcements of potential defensive measure to a phase of implementation of these measures, with a risk of obvious escalation, tit for tat in retaliation. And I think that this discussion is precisely allowing for frank discussion and trying to dig in what can be our misunderstanding, and particularly on two misunderstandings, and I would like to focus on it. On the concern that China has with what we target as Chinese overcapacities and the pressure that it is imposing on the EU and elsewhere, and the rising protectionism on the European side. Chinese overcapacity are obviously related to the competitive advantage that China has gained into the technological sector, and notably into the green technological sector. And it's based on its economic model, based on three pillars: setting strategic objectives, important state aid, and a very fierce domestic competition between Chinese companies. And this model has proved to be very successful. Now what is worrying the EU is that the shift of the investment from the real estate sector to the manufacturing sector. While the manufacturing sector in China is already very important and represent a big share of the Chinese growth, and the focus now on exports notably of green technologies, which is an essential leverage for the Chinese economic growth, is increasing the imbalances between the importance of domestic demand and the importance of the manufacturing demand, and imposing a lot of pressure on competitors in the European market and elsewhere. That's what is getting me to the protectionist, how we understand protectionism on the European side. The Europeans are not intended to decouple, as it was mentioned by Ambassador previously. The focus of the Europeans is really on the resilience of supply chains and maintaining global supply chains open. We have the same concern as China, is to support our growth, and the priorities of the European Commission are to use the new tools of trade autonomous defense to protect the European industry, but avoiding protectionism precisely, remaining in line with WTO rules. And this is an objective which is very strongly rooted in the European Commission. Now we need to pay attention to the trends that will be expressed during the European elections, and with increasing populist movements calling for concrete protectionism. So there's really a strong potential in Europe to choose more protectionist avenues, but it is not, for the moment, the choice of the European Commission. And the expectation on the European side would be rather to try to rebalance the importance of Chinese demand with the investment in the manufacturing sector, to address the risk of further imbalances at the global level. That takes me just to a word on WTO, because we've been focusing a lot on the United Nations this morning and mentioning less the WTO. We need to be aware that if we're not confident on the capacity to negotiate strongly at the WTO level, we risk there's a further risk of erosion of respect of WTO rules, and that we need to go back to the spirit of the WTO, which is to preserve the balance of the global economy, and measures that would be supporting the Chinese demand, the Chinese consumption, and more reciprocity in access to Chinese consumption would be much expected on the European side. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvire. And you raise an interesting point, the link between what's described as Chinese overcapacity and the deficiency of domestic demand within China and the high savings rate, I suppose, too. So I wonder, in the discussion at any stage, any of the Chinese interlocutors may like to comment on that, but we'll proceed with the speakers list straight away. So could I invite Han Bing, who is former Deputy Director General of MOFCOM, Department of European Affairs, former Economic and Commercial Counselor of the Chinese Embassy in Croatia and in Poland, and is now a non-resident Senior Fellow at CCG, to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank the CCG to invite me to attend today's the roundtable. It's a good opportunity to exchange the views with the guests. So I was about 15 years in Europe and worked with mainly the Eastern European countries. And the last 10 years I was in Africa. I'm suggested to speak in English, but I'm afraid that my English is poor. I cannot precisely to express my thinking. So I would like to speak in Chinese. So thank you for the understanding.
I think as to U.S.-China relationship, indeed, recently we've seen some new situations, new developments, and there are several issues we need to address. The first is mutual trust. Not long ago, we talked with Mr. Martin Wolf, the chief economist of The Economist, and he said that in the world we need to increase mutual trust. Mutual trust is based on mutual understanding and exchange of views. The 3-year pandemic has really caused us a lot of problems and troubles, and after opening up, at least on the Chinese side, we have done a lot. For example, we have opened up a visa arrangement for the European countries, so that is a great boost to our exchange of visits. So on the European side and on the Chinese side, we both need to increase exchange of goodwill. If you look at the European description of China as a partner, competitor, and systemic rival, I think at least they think partner is the number one description of China. As to China, we consider European as collaborator rather than rivals or competitors. So we hope to conduct extensive cooperation with Europe. For example, you proposed the global gateway. In terms of infrastructure construction, I think that's a good opportunity for us. So we can do 3-party cooperation. I worked in Africa for 10 years. I know there's a great demand for infrastructure construction in Africa. So BRI and the Global Gateway can be linked together for us to cooperate, but that must be based on the goodwill willingness for cooperation. And when we think about bilateral relationship, we must be rational instead of impulsive. Some politicians, when they tend to be quite impulsive on some issues. Now, we've seen officials and politicians are not very calm or cool-headed in their thinking, and in such a complicated situation, real statesmen are not there to please people. Real statesmen are there to make proposals that can be accepted by both parties rather than pleasing one party at the expense of the other party. So in terms of economy, we should consider the laws of economics. For example, we can work together in the WTO. If we politicize economic issues or take economic issues as security issues, it is harmful to both sides. And the Chinese market, when we opened up, was monopolized by U.S., European, and Japanese technologies. So the foreign countries made a lot of profit at the time. So as we develop, we want to use our own technologies and to make profit.
And then we want to create a new room in the space of cooperation. In the beginning, we were absorbing the technologies and then transfer technologies from Western countries. And Western countries set up the joint ventures with China, with the China's counterpart, so that the technologies can be learned from China's side. And right now, European countries feel threatened, but actually we can try to tackle these problems by having this or adopting the same solutions. Like we can invest in European countries, in the Western countries, and all of these technology issues actually could be handled by both sides on the reciprocity principles. And when it comes to the mindset or mentality, one must have the mentality of cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General Han. You rightly said we must have the mentality of cooperation. So again, we move forward in that positive vein. Could I now invite Chen Yang, who's Executive Director, the Institute of European Studies at the CICIR, to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, CCG, for having me. First, I have to say that I'm sorry I'm late. I have been caught in a big traffic jam, so I have time to see the cars on the street carefully. I count how many cars from China, how many cars from Germany or Japan. So my conclusion is that most of them come from Germany and Japan, but in China, we didn't say the overcapacity of Germany or Japan. Let's know the word from China. We see the Germany and Japan, they are trade partners. We accept the advantage card in our market. So that's the first point I want to say. Let me turn to our topic this afternoon. I received the program. The topic is about the bilateral relations in the area of economic security. First of all, I want to say recently I have read a paper from Bulgaria. The topic is how to de-risk European economy in a world of independence. This paper is new, but not the only one. I have read a lot of such papers. They try to find a way how to de-risk with China. Right now, it's a hot topic in Europe, I think. This paper, I want to spend some time to analyze this paper. This paper raises two questions. Number one, how the EU should de-risk its external economic relationship without foregoing the benefit of trade. Number two, how can policymakers tell when trade dependence are excessive? To settle these problems, the paper had some proposals. For example, first, de-risking should focus on a few product categories which the cost of supply interruption will be unquestionably large. Second, build up a deeper and broader European single market to release resilience. Third, complete the de-risking and resilience with deterrence. However, in my opinion, this proposal didn't provide convincing answers, but just raised much more questions. How to measure the unquestionable large costs of supply interruption? How deeper and broader the European single market should become to get resilience, that member states of the EU could get consensus. In that kind of deterrence, could not trigger lateralization from the trade partners, particularly if these measures violate WTO rules. It seems like the author of the paper just used some descriptive means to answer these two questions. Actually, the answer is impossible because the dependence cannot be identified reliable even with sophisticated analysis and data. For example, as the EU Commission defined, there are 137 products should be considered highly dependent on imports from third countries. But according to some European scholars' estimation, the list could be reduced to only 21 products. That's huge difference because they use the different measures, different data and analysis. So it's an impossible mission to identify the de-risking products exactly. And then the questions, why we will do such hard work to get suspect result. The paper is new. I think so many research in Europe do such research to find how to de-risk. It's not about just to get finance support from government or some interested groups, but they do concerns about economic security in today's world. In my observation, there are three things cause this concern. First, pandemic-related supply disruption. Second, the energy crisis provoked by Russia and Ukraine conflict. Third, the so-called cohesive action took by China towards Australia and Lithuania. The first one, I think it should be categorized into natural disaster. The violence spreading, we human beings do not want to see that happen again. But as the climate change, the earth getting warmer, maybe the natural disaster will become more frequently. However, as human beings, we will get more skills and messages through experience to face the disaster. The second one, I'm sorry, may I have a little more time?
No, please, we have plenty of time, so please continue. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. The second one, in many Western experts' eyes, it should be categorized into the geography competition. So it's not only about Russia and Ukraine, Europe, but also about US and China. Despite the Chinese scholar experts keep saying that China is not Russia, China-EU trade are very comprehensive, and both sides cannot sustain from the economic decoupling. The Europeans do not believe. Moreover, there are some research papers in Europe said that the trade decoupling between China and Germany may cause a shock in the short term, but in a long-term perspective, the damage towards German economy is limited. I don't want to debate with this argument here, but I want to say the risk of geopolitical competition towards the economy should not be ignored because we are living in an area of great power competition. And if there are some misjudgment come up, the damage is so huge that we cannot calculate in statistics. Even you have goodwill to coexist with other powers, but you cannot afford the price with the assumption that the others think like you. The third one, I think we talk so much about China. We almost forget when EU issued the Anti-Cohesion Act, its major target is USA. The Trump administration threatened to launch the tariff war with EU. We should notice that in this year, the Trump has a big chance to come back. That will become a big problem, but as the cohesive action, maybe we should call it economic influence. It's a great power tool. EU countries also use it frequently towards some developing countries to keep them on track, the EU design. I'm sorry, it's a little bit longer.
Please continue, that's fine.
Thank you. I think it's a soft power. It's better than using hard military weight. We should know that if there are great power in the world, we cannot stop them to use them. So we are living in a world with more frequently natural disasters and more fiercely great power competition. Maybe it's a huge financial economic crisis waiting for us, not far away. The economic security concerns our nation. However, the real problem is how to deal with this concern, especially for the bilateral relations between China and EU. The subject of the roundtable is the bilateral relation in the area of economic security. But I think economic security become a problem is mostly because our bilateral relation become a problem. You have an enemy pictured in your mind and define each other as rival at first, and then there will be economic security problems. If we have good relations, the economic security will not be an issue. If we have some risks, we can take control of it together. We can do de-risking together. If EU and China produce enough green tech products together, we could have a chance to save our Earth. If we communicate and cooperate more deeply, we could have a chance to avoid the conflict escalation and spill out, and keep the great powers in balance, and connect, and stop the world splitting, and show an example how to cooperation between the two different civilizations. However, right now, we are lack of basic trust, just like my fellow speaker said. Between the countries, we don't have enough space cooperation. So sincerely, I hope that EU and China could shape a good bilateral relations so as to consolidate and promote the economic security and benefit other countries. That's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, Director Chen. You've given us much food for thought, and can I just comment that you're of course correct that the anti-coercion instrument was conceived initially in response to measures taken by the Trump administration against the European Union, which people sometimes forget. But that also emphasizes another important point, that EU trade policy and EU measures are country agnostic. They follow the rules, they follow WTO principles. They are, by definition, country agnostic. So thank you for your remarks. And could I invite Jörg Wuttke, Associate Director, Head of Europe's Political Economy in the European Policy Centre, to take the floor. Jörg, please.
Thank you, Declan. Ladies and gentlemen, my first words, of course, will be to thank the CCG, thank Henry for the very warm welcome. I was in China for the first time 15 years ago, and that made a great impression on me, and I'm absolutely very pleased to be here again. I wanted, given that a lot has been said already, to make a link to this morning's discussion. And of course, Europe, the EU, we as Europeans are very attached to global governance, the fight against climate change, fight for biodiversity, global health, food security, and also new challenges, AI, space, as was also mentioned this morning. But in this context, I want to make one comment, and that is that don't make the mistake, I think, to believe that Europe's attachment to global governance will prevent the EU from defending its interests and its most fundamental values. One can be attached to global governance, but one also has to look after one's interests and most fundamental values. And in this regard, I wanted to reflect a little bit on something else that was said this morning to start with. And the analysis that was put forward by our friend from Serbia, who was suggesting that what is happening in Europe right now is about Russia standing up to American power. And I must say that seen from Brussels, seen from the EU's capitals, that is not the problem that Europe is facing. The problem that Europe is facing is Russia's onslaught on Ukraine. And there is no other word for it than that. Russia's onslaught on Ukraine. It's against the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, the principle of territorial integrity, the right of self-determination, and it is really an existential crisis, as Declan was saying this morning, an existential question, an existential threat to Europe, to European countries, to the EU, if that's the idea that a bigger power can come in and seize territory and threaten the population of another smaller country. There's war in Europe and there's war on Europe, and that is conditioning Europe's mindset right now. And I think Ambassador Nelli Feroci has alluded to it, or said it clearly twice now. This is, of course, also an issue in EU-China relationship. Perhaps the biggest issue in the EU-China relationship. To pick up on Mr. Ma's words, you were asking for self-reflection, both on the European side and the Chinese side, and asking why it's gone this far. Well, there is a third actor that has inserted itself between China and the EU, and that is Russia. And I heard Mr. Amisir this morning. I understand he's a patron of this conference. I hadn't heard the terms before. He used the term of CRINCs, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I think this is a geopolitical picture that Europeans are profoundly uncomfortable with, and this is part of what will very much condition relations going forward. So I think this is a backdrop that we can't ignore, also when we talk about the economy. Now to the economy. We also heard this morning that the economy and security need not couple, that they can be decoupled. And I'm afraid that's not my observation. I think the mighty two, China and the US, not Europe, not the global south, but China and the US are very much coupling the two these days. The economy is becoming security. Broader and broader fields of technology are dual use. Industrial policy is creating geopolitical facts. And of course, now we're talking about EU-China relations. I think what we're observing from Europe is that China has been doing a lot of industrial policy over the past years, over the past decades. In fact, so much that Europe is starting, can I say, to take inspiration from China. Made in China 2025, dual circulation. This is something, I would say, it's taken us years for Europeans to study and really to understand and come to terms with the ambitions of and the consequences of. And I think it's more properly understood now. And so I would say that when Europe, for instance, is developing its own net zero industry action plan, the Net Zero Industry Act, its investment in critical clean tech and climate tech, in wind, solar, batteries, the implications this will all have for EVs and so on and so forth. In fact, what we are starting to do in Europe is to try to do things that China decided to do already 10, 15 years ago. And I agree very much with what Mr. Yang Sheng was saying about the EU's economic tools. I think you know the attachment of the EU to open markets. I too spent some time counting cars outside the hotel during the 2-3 days I've been here. I must admit I didn't see quite as many German cars as you seem to have seen, but there are many sectors we can look at. Look at the sectors of wind turbines. We had excellent producers in Europe that saw China as an open market, as an export market, but that have encountered the greatest difficulties. And so the question now that we are scaling up and due to scale up wind power in formidable ways in Europe, there is a real question whether Chinese producers should have a more favorable treatment coming to Europe than what European producers had coming to China. And when it comes to EVs, as this is front and center of the discussion, well, for the time being, it's an investigation by the European Commission to check whether open market principles are being respected. I think this investigation will conclude relatively quickly, and we'll see what the decision will be. But I want to say something else, and that I'm not sure actually in this space that the most significant element going forward will be tariffs. We had another interesting comment this morning from Mr. Xu Sengsong about the digital civilization taking over from the industrial revolution and the industrial civilization. And I heard a statement made in that context about we don't want to see the digital world dividing. But I must say the digital world is already divided. When I come here to China, I can't use the applications I most commonly use in Europe. That digital world is already divided. And then so even when we think about cars, when we think about EVs, tomorrow autonomous driving vehicles, what are they? They are boxes of steel and aluminum and plastic, but they're digital boxes of steel and aluminum and plastic. So I am concerned about what this digital divide will then also mean for open markets. And I think this is very much part of the challenges that we are not addressing and talking about. And I don't think that if we're talking about open markets, open trade, that it will be mostly on the tariff front. It will be very much on the regulatory front that will be facing deep challenges going forward, as, by the way, we've already seen them in many areas. My final word is again turning back to the political, if you want, the geopolitical. I think it's very important to understand to all our international interlocutors that the EU is a peace project. And one way to understand the EU is the EU was created after the Second World War as a break with the Second World War, with two world wars, with fascism, and also I would say as a break with imperialism and colonialism. And as Declan said this morning, a lot of the most fundamental principles of the UN cooperation have been built into our constitution as the EU. The idea of open markets has been built into our constitution, the EU treaties. The EU is not a hegemony, is not hegemonic. So I want to say that to answer this question, how one can work further together, I think if we can avoid hegemonic tendencies, there is the possibility, and that's what we need to do, to restore historic friendship with the Chinese people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jörg. Again, very much food for thought there. And one point you mentioned is the slight shifts in approach of philosophy among the three big players, the EU, the US, and China. A Finnish professor based in New York, whom I know has written several very good books. One on the digital empires is her most recent book, and in it she classifies the three different approaches of just a couple of years ago to regulation. That the US approach is what she calls markets-based. that the EU approach is what she calls rights-based, and that the Chinese approach is what she calls state-based. But you can see the changes. I mean, I think you can see that the US approach is now quite heavily state-based if you look at the effects of the Inflation Reduction Act and the industrial policy the US has faced. And geopolitics is posing challenges for the EU and China as well. But thank you, Jörg. And now could I invite Liu Zhou, Director, Institute of World History at CAS, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Declan. Also, I thank you very much for the CCG, the invitation, especially President Wang Huiyao for your invitation. I'm also so glad to meet again the friend on April 26th, Fabian, also Lin Goethals in Tsinghua University. Today it's a good occasion that we talk about on navigating the uncertainty. It's a very, very good topic to discuss China-EU relations. I only want to say that I just changed my job just 1 month ago, that I'm devoting to the China-EU relations for more than 20 years. Start from the honeymoon relation between China and EU, and now ended at the more confrontational relation between China and EU. So I think I must go back to history to talk about the honeymoon, which will make me more pleasant. But if you make a summary on China-EU relations in the past 50 years, I can see that the interdependence and the cooperation are all with the mainstreams. I totally agree with our Chinese colleague that Hanbin, that we only consider the cooperation is a good choice for China-EU relations. In the past 50 years, interdependence and cooperation are the mainstream and has created big enormous of the certainty in the world. So you see that this is a historical test that only interdependence and cooperation are the good choice. But now we have stepped into a more uncertainty world, and especially since 2008, the debt crisis, financial crisis, Brexit, COVID, pandemic, also Ukraine crisis, Israel-Palestine conflicts. All these uncertainties have divided China-EU relations. We have some in common, but more difference with each other on all these uncertainties. But what is China's logic to solve these differences, or this, I think, how to devote all these differences between China and EU? China's logic is that we can live with the difference alone and enhance cooperation on some area which have in common. But I have impression that our European partners only think that now, firstly, we must talk about the difference. We must solve the difference, then talk about the cooperation. So this is the logic between China and EU, that we think the difference is good, but it is very important, but we must let it alone and find more ways, approach to enhance the cooperation. So now further I want to say that what the main cause or the root cause of the conflicts between China and EU recently. Here I think maybe it's not correct that we see the conflict, we see the differences with each other. I think how to perceive and understand each other are very, very important. Here, I think I have no authority to talk about the EU to perceive or understanding of China. I only want to say how China perceive and understand of the EU. Firstly, I think that let's talk about one thing is about the de-risking policy in practice. From China's perspective, we think that the de-risking policy is creating big uncertainties in the world, in the cooperation. This is China's understanding. So you can see our President Xi or other colleagues often emphasize that de-risking is not a good choice. But our EU partner only see that de-risking is a good choice for EU because which it will keep even more secure, more safety, more stable. But for China, I think it's not a good choice. This is in practice, we think that de-risking is not a good choice. The second, we only see that the three identification, I mean the cooperative partners, competitors, and the systematic rival, which also creating a huge confusion in the mindset. Because you could not see from Chinese perspective, you could not imagine that whether we can talk about the cooperation in the atmosphere of a very systematic confrontational relations. So this is Chinese logic. We must have a good atmosphere so we can talk about the cooperation. So I think this is second that the three identification has been creating some confusion from Chinese perspective. The third, let's talk about the narrative and the reality. You only see that de-risking is not targeting to China, which means that we are not anti-China, we are still supporting the cooperation with China. But this is a good narrative. But in practice, we see more and more very concrete action that you take some very concrete anti-China policies, especially for anti-dumping policies, something like a very hostile action towards China. Also, I think it also takes some sanctions, firstly, target China. So this is also another confusion to us that whether the narrative and the reality is the same or you only take what you want to do. You have, say, a very good narrative, but in practice, you only hold a very negative policy towards China. So this is, I think, which China perceives the EU. But actually, we think that if we look back at history in the past 50 years, we only think that the good choice is the interdependence and the cooperation, the good cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Liu. You actually identified in your remarks the value of think tank exchanges such as this, which are to address confusions and promote mutual understanding, and particularly on concepts and words. So I think your comments I take in very much in that light, that it justifies our think tank exchange today. We've gone through all of our designated speakers. Now, could I invite Henry and Fabian, if they wish to make some comments at this stage? And I think we have time for any other comments from the designated speakers afterwards. But please, Henry or Fabian, give you the... Okay, Fabian, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all the contributions. I think it's been a very rich discussion. Maybe just some reflections from my side about the nature of the world we're facing. And I think this is important that we try to look ahead, not just react to what has been in the past. And there, unfortunately, I think we are facing, Declan talked about the European perma crisis we've talked about in Europe, which we've gone through for the last 15 years. I think, and apologies to the translators for making up words, but we're now facing a global perma-poly crisis, a crisis across many dimensions, interrelated, which is intractable at this moment in time. So what we need to talk about is not uncertainty, we need to talk about risk. And from a European perspective, there are many risks at the moment. A number of these risks have been highlighted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The reason why we have a discussion in Europe around weaponized interdependence is because our energy dependence was used against us in that conflict. Russia continues to be a risk for Europe, not only for Ukraine directly, it is a direct security risk for the whole continent. And there is a much broader risk that if Russia wins this conflict, it gives a message to the rest of the world about the permission to carry out this kind of aggression, to question the territorial integrity, to question borders within this world. We are also facing risks around some of our global commons when it comes to climate change. We collectively suffer from a progress illusion that what we are doing at the moment is sufficient in terms of the scale and the scope of the challenge which we are facing. We are facing a risk of further escalation in some of the conflicts we are seeing around the world. We're facing a risk of further division, further fragmentation, further polarization. In that context, it will be much harder to maintain cooperation. It will be much harder to make the global system work, and we are already seeing that the global system is under pressure. What do we need to try to preserve or maybe achieve? I think this very much is in line also with why the European Union was created. We're talking about peace and security. We're talking about sustainable prosperity and mutually beneficial competition. And we're talking about fairness, justice, a governance system which works, and global cooperation on common goods. I think we all used to hope that we could achieve all of these simultaneously, but what we're seeing now in this world is that often these goals are clashing with each other, and that it is not easy to bring these under one hat. And it's going to be much, much harder to continue to do that. And from a European perspective, certainly all of these dimensions are currently under threat. Security continues to be questioned by Ukraine. I think there is an attempt in Europe to ensure that we will have lower vulnerability in future. Now, maybe we call that de-risking, maybe we call it something different, but it is about reducing the ability of others, and that's why it is also about open strategic autonomy. We are trying to achieve a reasonable level of also economic security. And there I would just say that I don't think this is unusual. I think a lot of the world has been doing this for a long time. I think what is different now is that the European Union is for the first time seriously trying to do it together. And that does have an effect. But I think what is also at risk is sustainable prosperity. It is mutually beneficial competition, and I think it is right that the European Union does question whether there is a level playing field in a number of different areas. But I would emphasize here the questioning of the level playing field. It is not necessarily that there is a foregone conclusion, but it is about investigating. But all of this is also made more difficult by the decline in global governance, the decline in the mechanisms which are there. And there, also following up from this morning, I think there also has to be a bit of a warning note. Yes, we're moving into a different world, maybe a more multipolar world, although some countries seem to be a bit more polar than others. But I think a multipolar world does not mean a multilateral world. Multilateralism is a choice. It is something which you have to work very hard to achieve. And the risk of the kind of world we're moving into now is not that it is a different rules-based order, not that it is a more inclusive rules-based order, which is absolutely necessary, but the risk is that we're moving towards chaos, that we're moving to a world where conflict, chaos, and climate change are the reality in which we all live. So I think cooperation continues to be extremely important. And I'm not claiming this is a one-sided problem. This is something where we're seeing a challenge across the world, and certainly from a European perspective. While we have a very strong security alliance with the US, it does not mean that we agree with the US on everything the US does, nor do we agree on all the economic policies. So there continues to have to be a global discussion which recognizes this new reality and which takes that as a starting point to continue to build cooperation, and in particular, and I want to end on this because I think it is important to emphasize this over and over again, this should be about an intergenerational approach. We should be starting to think much more about what future generations will need, because when it comes to issues such as climate change, if our generation doesn't get it right, we're not leaving a world for the next generation to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian. And now could I invite Henry to speak? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Declan. And yes, I think we had a very good discussion this round of designated speakers, and I really learned a lot. I think that I agree. EU is probably the biggest peace project since World War, since World War II. But now we have a lot of challenges, of course. So how we can make a peace back again? It's really testing the wisdom and relations of all countries. And also, I think first of all, China and EU should make a peace. For example, we'll talk. I think Mr. Ma talked about the comprehensive agreement on investment treaty, which has been suspended because of each other's sanctions. And now European is having a new sanction, and then the change of new parliament members. Perhaps I could recommend that after the new members, we can restore the Kai, and as ambassador, former Chinese ambassador Fu actually mentioned that China is willing to drop all the sanctions and let the EU do the same, and we can maybe try to restore some of that. I agree with Fabian that absolutely EU should not go everything as US proposed. For example, if the US says strategic rivalry and the EU says systematic rivalry, maybe we could not repeat too much of that, because I think it's already, if you define a situation of cooperation, de-risk, and rivalry is already 2 negative plus 2 1 is a 2 minus 1. It's still minus. So I think maybe we should more neutral a little bit. But I do see a lot of potentials of cultural exchanges. Tourism is recently has been restored quite a lot, and I was in Spain. I saw so much tourists of Chinese tourists coming back. There's more flights actually going to Spain now, probably than pandemic before. So there are student exchanges, and I'm very pleased to see 12 countries from Europe has been opened visa-free to China, and we'd like to see more of that. I would propose to all EU countries to do that, even to the US. China is really seeing is believing. If you come to see it, I think people will have a different impression. And I will touch a little bit about this overcapacity issue, because overcapacity issue has been written quite a bit lately. I just recently, last week, week or two ago, I published an article in the South China Morning Post. I was saying basically the demand for the green products, according to the Paris Agreement, that we need to spend 4.5 trillion a year US dollars on fighting climate change. Now we only spend 1.8 trillion, far from oversupply, and also even for the solar panels. We need 820 gigawatts, and now we only need a quarter of that in 2022, according to International Atomic Agency. So you see, there's a huge gap. So we don't want to see that we postpone the deadline for using, gasoline or phase out those fossil-driven technology, while we have available, the technology that we're not using. For example, I mean, U.S. and Europe produce the 90% of commercial aircraft. We're not seeing the oversupply. Everybody's using, and I agree with what the Mercedes CEO. I mean, we were at last November in Berlin. There was a CDU conference with all the parliament in Bundestag. That Mercedes-Benz formula was there, and Mercedes CEO said the biggest risk is not going to China. So, because, for example, we're talking about overcapacity of EV cars. Half of that was made by multinational, Tesla, Mercedes, BMW, all the rest. So we're not counting on China, but we're not. So I think probably we should really look at that. If there's tariff imposed on that, it will hurt European industries as much as probably China. But it's also hurting the climate change. We're going to slow down that process. So I really think that we shouldn't. We have to think very hard on those tariffs. I think EU doesn't have an election problem like the U.S. I mean, what President Biden recently did was really, I think, was election-driven probably. So I want to, conclude that. Really, we probably should have more track to dialogue, think tank dialogues. So, like today, we had very different opinions of different kind. And also, I noticed that our Russian representative from the think tank is here also. We can really see how we can work together. China's broke to do for Iran and the Saudis, but China can work with EU on mediating the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, and also EU can mediate in the conflict between China and the US. So we really can work on each other. And finally, we talk about the digital divide. But China is trying to join CPTPP, which UK has joined that. There's a lot of digital rules there. We could also, through negotiations, to really straighten out all the balances of differences. But I really think the digital divide is really going to cut the global south and majority of the world into big developing countries. You're really going to suffer from that. I know we have a senior representative, senior vice president from Huawei is here. We'd like to hear from your industry voice on how this digital divide maybe can share a bit of your. I saw at the Berlin Global Solutions Summit. You mentioned this digital divide is a very good idea. Maybe we could hear from Kenneth, as you from industry representative. We have to talk economy and hear from industry too.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. We had a talk in Berlin, and there's a lot of talk about the decoupling within the technology industry as well, and obviously, being deeply rooted in this industry, from Huawei's perspective, we are also very concerned about the decoupling that is ongoing, not only from the industry perspective, but the consequences beyond just the fact that the market will be divided in two or several segments. I think especially when we talk about the benefits the technology, the digitalization has provided the developing world. And the developing world has benefited greatly from, I think, globalization inside the technology industry because of the global standards, economies of scale, bringing down the costs of technology, allowing them, of course, to benefit from connectivity, not only from economic perspective, but also from, providing education or health services more easily, as connectivity provides these opportunities. What I'm concerned about, and what the industry is starting to be concerned about, is obviously that if we are now moving towards a decoupled technology standard, means that we will have several standards again, the cost will rise again. And
that will have further consequences or bigger consequences on the developing world, not the West, not China. We will still be able to afford the cost of the advanced technologies, allowing us to continue digitalization through investments in technology, in connectivity. But the developing world will probably suffer more, and that will again then increase the digital divide. And the digital divide will then again have huge negative consequences on the developing world as we see it. So, from an industry perspective, we believe that, China, European Union, and also the US, we should have a duty and we should take an obligation of making sure that we maintain global standards within technology in order to keep cost of production, development of technology as low as possible to allow the whole world to benefit from digitalization. As of now, it looks like this might not be the case unless we get together and find ways of keeping the momentum of the benefits of global standards. I think the recent or the past decade has shown everyone what global standards can bring in terms of benefits. I think if you look backwards in the past, there has been multiple standards within different types of technologies, such as mobile networks, while in, for example, 5G technology, it's been purely based on one global standard, which, I think has demonstrated that when you have a united standard, the cost will come down, the competition will focus in the same direction, which of course will also then drive innovation further. If we are now moving ahead into a decoupled standardization world again, we will see costs increasing because resources will need to be spent on different directions when it comes to technology development. And again, I don't think that will harm the West or China the most. It will harm the developing world, the global South, and that is a responsibility we as an industry would like to take. We want to make sure that we can move ahead with global standards also in the future. But of course, with the current geopolitical climate, this is now up for grabs or highly uncertain if we are able to maintain. So I think this is a perspective we should keep in mind when we look at decoupling or when we discuss decoupling. It's not just about technology from a security perspective. It's also about technology providing benefits for the human mankind beyond just the West or China. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Fabian and Henry. I think you both summed up the discussion very well. I think we've heard many valuable and important ideas today. We don't yet have all the answers, but I think we've made a very good start on identifying the major problems and asking the right questions. There are many more questions, and it's my sincere hope that we can follow up on these themes in subsequent exchanges and meetings. So I think this has been, from my position as moderator, an excellent discussion. I'd like to thank everybody, and I declare this session closed. So I hope you can have some tea or coffee or other refreshments. Thank you.
Thank you.